Welcome, everybody, to this month's edition of the Cincinnati Public Schools Board of Education Policy Committee meeting. It's good to see some familiar names over here in the attendee box. And as we always do, real quick, let's go around the horn. If everyone in Dan Hoying's box could introduce themselves first.
Sure. Dan Hoying, General Counsel.
Stephanie Scott, Assistant General Counsel.
Sarah Brody, Director of Talent Development.
Oh wow, we got some strong, powerful people here. This is great. And then Ms. Bolton.
Hi, Eve Bolton, board member.
And I am Mike Morosky, also a board member. And Mr. Lindy will be here soon. He is our third member of the policy committee. We are going to kick off this meeting with a really important agenda item. Each committee of the school board has been tasked with coming up with their own specific sort of set of budgetary asks. And so we're going to kick that off right now and then report out to the full board when we meet again. And so to do that, as is customary, I will kick it to my colleagues, in this case, Ms. Bolton, and then Mr. Lindy, hopefully he'll join on. I have a couple of my own, but each committee is going to present again to the board what their sort of priorities out of their committee related to their committee, so related to policy, what we're looking for in the budget. So do you have anything to add, Ms. Bolton, in addition to what we've already talked about?
Just an initial start would be that I don't know that any other committee is tasked with the job, let alone the title, regarding equity. And yeah. I think it would be useful, not necessarily today, but as we talk about whatever we would add or react to that came from some of these budget initiatives out of Old Shore, New Shore, and what have you, is to actually look at diversity and equity and access as to which of these budget items, be they the kind of normal or standard ones or the new initiatives, actually work toward greater fair access, and which ones are representative of equity as a hallmark and actually increase equity. Because I'm not always sure that when you have as much institutional structure as we have and as much precedent as we have, especially in budgets, that what is in our budgets actually speaks to the equity issue. So I would hope thematically, and there are a couple that do, but I'll save that for just a moment, but some of those specifics. But I really, looking at this, see it as being our job to present to the board those things that we think are prioritized for equity.
So that is an awesome place to start because, hey, Ben, 100% of on my list is in regard to what you just said. And so I'm gonna leave that out there for now, leave the suspense to build, and then catch Ben up real quick. Ben, our first agenda item, as you know, is our Policy and Equity Committee's asks for the budget. As you know, each committee was tasked with coming up with sort of a set of their budget priorities, right? That we will then present to the full board the next time we meet. So Eve was just saying that in her mind, we are the only committee that is expressly charged with sort of overseeing, for lack of a better term, this equity piece. It's in our name. And so she was saying, regardless of what the priorities are, just to, ensure that we as a committee kind of remind folks, that we need to fully fund these things and make sure that equitable access is possible. And so I have, it was perfect. You came in right when I was telling her, that aligns perfectly with my list that I'll share in a moment, because that's what my entire list is actually, is around that issue. So I didn't know if you came with anything, Ben, that you wanted to put out there so we can have it reflected in the minutes. Turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I just agree with everything that both of you two said. And, I've seen in different, versions over the last couple months, this diversity and inclusion office. I'm making the assumption that that's already funded at the level that the administration wants in the current proposal. If that's not true, I'd love to just raise that from this committee to check. But that's the only other thought that I had.
Well, that's great. If Eve, if you don't mind, I'm gonna add to that a little bit, if that's okay.
Cool.
Kick back to you, see if you got anything to add. So Ben, in my list, you know, we run the risk of a few things when you have a policy as awesome as the anti-racism policy. Risk number one is that nothing happens. We've already dodged that risk. That's not going to happen. Things are happening. But then the second thing that, if we're not careful, can happen is we can have this sort of create a position called diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then charge a person with ridding an enormous district of racism, which is impossible. And so we need to make sure that that office is funded, that that person has a staff, that costs money, that they have what they need to offer the training, because the training isn't just for the teachers. Remember, the training is for the teachers, principals, board members, central office, everybody. That all costs money. And so I just wanted to those, like, the sort of line item it out. Those are the things I think of, like this training, a staff, materials, etc. So not just a position to oversee the equity piece. So that was what I had, largely again, staff, resources, and training for everybody to be able to be on the same page. Because if the rest of the district is on the same page, this person can do their job. So that's all I had. So Eve, I don't know if you had anything specific you wanted to throw in there.
Sure. Just thematically, I think that's important. One of the things that I would really be interested in pushing is, as you're saying about the diversity officer, I think it makes sense in this time period, as you're talking about staff and funding and what have you. It might not be bad to think about maybe some other offices as well being merged to that office, or to bring together kind of this anti-racism theme and draw it from some of the other offices and divisions of the district, so that there's more of a comprehensive effort. Certainly, you know, legal counsel has to be very involved with all of that, as well as, you know, perhaps curriculum and also the discipline piece. It's just to organize it in such a way that it is complementary and supplementary, if you will. So there's that core, I don't want to call it a budget center or what have you, but I think it makes more sense than that some isolated person in an office somewhere having to do that kind of thing. You know, in its own way, there are ways that even the internal auditor can be involved. From a standpoint of process and operations. I think we could expand her role in many ways as we look around. I also would add to that, I would hope to see more customized, and it's on the list, customized learning for our students, and more customized individual PD instead of this wholesale stuff. I think that speaks to the equity piece, that you meet people where they are and individualize their learning. And I know you've been very involved with that customized learning and thinking about it, Mike. And I know former member Davis was very involved with those individual, something that came out of student achievement. So customized learning, customized PD instead of just the wholesale justification for administrative activity. And then I think the other two that I would say is making sure that we subsidize Wi-Fi, not just because for the COVID reason, but the stuff that we didn't have during COVID that we had to subsidize would seem to me on a daily basis. We're going to have to continue to do that, because if the kids didn't have the opportunity, as we found out with current technology and current Wi-Fi coverage, it seems that we would have to continue to do that. And my last one is, I think broadly, very broadly adding and compartmentalizing as well more functions for CDA. because I think there's many things that are even happening at the school site that don't necessarily have to happen at the school site, but could be happening at CDA. And I think we need to more broadly interpret what CDA could be doing for us. So that Wi-Fi in the citywide or district-wide, finding a way to subsidize that, expand the role of CDA, and then that customized learning and customized PD, I think, are things that might not be touched that much in some of the other kind of budget battles, but speak to equity.
Yeah, and then the suggestion of looking at other departments and how they can all, assist and play a role, I think is really smart, and also efficient use of dollars too. So I think that's good too, to be reflected in the minutes. We'll report that out. And yes, I love the individualized piece, as you know. When we were a student, 2/3 of student achievement, I periodically bring up IEPs for every student and get laughed at, but I will still say that is the future. That's the future. Anyhow, awesome. So Ben, any closing before we go to agenda item 2? I think that's a good list, and I think it will help influence, our already pretty good budget. So do you have anything final, Ben?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Great. Awesome. Well, we'll move on then. So we keep it on here because it's what we do. One of our standing agenda items, board policies for board versus administration. We discussed, for those who are unaware, policies that are more about philosophy, those that are more about work, those that are more for the admin, those that are more for us, and the finance policies of the 6,000 series. Ms. Bolton, I know we left this on here again. I didn't know if you had an update for us. I'll turn it over to you.
Just a very, very quick one. If you'll recall, and I particularly call out Ms. Bruckner for helping us do this, just technically, we did separate the 6,000 series by the treasurer and now also the internal auditor going through our 2 separate lists, as you said, one about the work and one about the philosophy. The only change after the second review of it, and this is for Ms. Bruckner more than the members, is that the internal auditor moved 6460.01, which is about vendor management, down to the philosophy with policy vendor relations, believing that even that management as well as the relations deals with, like what we're dealing with today on the agenda, some of this relationship of access and fairness and whatever. So again, Ms. Bruckner, we moved 6460.01 vendor management, which was in the work list, goes down to the philosophy list to join 6460 for policy vendor relations. And then that includes for sure the 6,000 series. And I think I'm still standing by the rest of what we separated out through the later series and 700s and 800s or 9,000s or whatever it was. Mr. Hoyen would keep us, but I haven't had any revelations about any of the later ones, but I'm glad that they changed that vendor one just because of the nature of what we're doing today.
That's great. And for folks' edification, Ms. Bolton is the chair of finance, so it's been helpful to have that lens as we went through 6,000. So, all right, yeah, and thanks again, to Ms. Bruckner, not to beat a dead horse, but Pat Bruckner, who many of you or all of you cannot see, sort of keeps our policy committee in line and makes sure that we're moving forward. So, Ben, questions for Ms. Bolton?
Mike, I'm good. Thanks, Eve.
Okay.
That
Great. All right. Committee of the Whole is on here, and I'm going to admit this is not like me. I'm uncertain why. I know I probably said to put it here, so look for an assist.
I can refresh your memory. It's that we wrote that paragraph or two to add to the protocol. I noticed it wasn't in our notes or documents, but you'll recall that we got that assignment out of the committee and said we would take care of defining what Committee of the Whole was and putting it in the protocol, since we've been without it for a while.
That's right. Okay. Appreciate it. And so, I don't know if we want to have that, discussion and write it now. I mean, Dan, what do you think is the best way to move forward with that?
Is there a paragraph that's been drafted already?
Yes.
Okay. I am glad. I'm not sure I've seen that, but I'm glad to get my hands on it, and then I assume it would be just inserted into the board bylaws, the protocols.
Yeah. Yep.
Glad to do that and make sure it's available for your review for the next meeting.
Great.
Thanks, Sam. And so, Ms. Bruckner, I know you're listening. An agenda item for next time will be to look at that new protocol for committee of the whole. And if we put it on the agenda as protocol for committee of the whole, then maybe I won't forget why it's on there. It's embarrassing, but it happens. There's a lot going on. Okay, number 4. I know what this means. Policy for Ohio Principal Evaluation System. All right, OPES, let's do it.
Yeah, so Sarah Brody has joined us as well, and Sarah put together for us a review, a memo for you on the status of the implementation of Ohio Principal Evaluation System 2.0. As well, she and I looked at the policy, board policy 1530, evaluation of administrators, and recommended some a minor language change that we think would be needed to implement that program. Sarah, I don't know if you have anything to add. Otherwise, we're glad to answer your questions. Anything to add?
No, just happy to take any questions you all have about the shift.
I will open it up to my colleagues for questions first, Ben or Eve. Mr. Lindy.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for all the work, and I just, as somebody who's learning more about this, wanted to hear your take on what's most exciting about these changes, or anything you're worried about or could be a concern in these changes. And thank you.
Sure. So, my observation is that this change to OPES 2.0 puts us in line with the state shift over to OTES 2.0 and sort of how they've rethought teacher evaluation over the past couple of years. So the big shift from my perspective are 2 things. One, instead of pulling out student achievement as half of the weighting of the evaluation, which it was in prior versions of the OPES system, it instead embeds student learning and the use of high quality student data to measure that learning within the rubric and processes of the evaluation. So it moves away from student learning being 50% objective measure and rather embeds within the rubrics the measure of student learning happening. So that is what happened with OTES 2.0, which we adopted. OPES 2.0 does the same thing. It also, I think one of the nice things about OPES 2.0 is that it is better aligned to the Ohio principal standards that we're currently using to drive all of our. So that's a huge plus. And I'll stop there. So those are my two notes about big shift.
That's great. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to call out, and I get to Ms. Bolton's question. I was going to call out how cool I thought it was that the 2.0 builds in the student data. I think that's really cool. So, Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, just a question and follow-up, I guess, on, I know when we moved our policy closest to OTES 2.0, I know that HR, I think it was Ross and Paul and Dan, if you'll recall, Dan, where you guys, we had a little bit of a meeting via the computer, so to speak, to try to match the OTES 2.0 to, or make it in policy kind of language. Is this OPES draft as close to the new OPES as our policy was close to OTES 2.0.
So I'll start on that, and Sarah can add. I should be sharing my screen now. You should be able to see current board policy evaluation of administrators 1530. Much of this policy has to do with the sort of technical requirements regarding evaluating administrators, but with respect to the important piece, I think that is changed is that while OPES 1.0 would have dictated that 50% of a building administrator's eval shall be based on student growth measures, now those growth measures are embedded, I think, within the rubric. It's still considered, but not quite in the rote way that OPES 1.0 would have required.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I think our effort has been to not have such a parochial, although we're proud of our evaluation processes and we have some good history in it. I think we've tried to not be quite so parochial and find better ways to be more comparative, if you will, to what's happening in the state, like using the standards and whatever. I would hate to have more affiliation on OTES than we have, more affiliation with OTES 2.0 than we have affiliation with the OPES 2.0, if you get my drift. It seems as though this is not as tied, but I certainly be mistaken, and certainly we're ahead of the game, as I think the state board sent it back one more time to have a word change of may or should, but it will be passed and be able to be used next year. And our superintendent said we would be using it. I don't see quite the strong connection between OPES 2.0 and our OPES as I saw with OTES and OTES 2.0. So I'd be more comfortable if there seemed to be more alignment to that.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, are you saying in the policy we're interested in seeing more specifics around the OPES 2.0 framework?
Yes, because we basically policy-wise are demanding that of our teachers, but we've kept a lot of our individual and independent stuff in our policy, but I think more closely aligned OTES 2.0 to our new policy, which also appears in contracts. And I do wonder about whether or not administrators in their contracts have the same evaluation reference as teachers do. I'm just trying to do goose and gander here, especially as we move more to a global look at how we are evaluating our certificated personnel.
So I would say, just from the bargaining side, I don't think that CAS has as much language in their contract related to principal evaluation than I think you're referring to in CFT's contract. I will say that I think much like CFT, CPS works, or the administration works pretty closely with principal leaders to formulate an evaluation system that is aligned to state standards, but is also, works well within our district. An example, right now, in order to just the salary scale for principals, in order to get up to what's called senior status, our most experienced principals, that evaluation system was developed, I think with principals to come up with, ensuring that we were identifying just the very best principals that would fit in that senior status category. Again, not something that's necessarily dictated by the CAS contract, But I guess I'm not entirely clear. We certainly can take another look at the evaluation policy and try to include some more OPES 2.0 language within that, if that's what you're requesting.
Yes, I mean, I've been here when we added the performance element regarding administration evaluations. I think that's great. I do think there should be some individual, more parochial part that is ours in both. I'm not suggesting necessarily, although that the OPES 2.0 be in the administrative contract, but I don't want a double standard, especially as we are trying to move the district to a wider frame of reference. So specifically, I would like to see in our policy an effort to make a larger, more specific reference to the OPES. It reflects a lot more knowledge and a lot more data than we are able as a little district to do. So I would like to see the policy be more reflective. I'm not suggesting we open negotiations to put it in the contract, but I am saying that I do think that the policy needs to reflect state law.
Ms. Bolton, nothing in our current, after close reading our current policy, nothing in there precludes the implementation of OPES 2.0 as designed by the state. So that was a really careful read we did do, and that is the one change that you've seen reflects the only shift that would be needed to ensure the policy aligns. But I think we could implement more language that is specific to OPES 2.0 in the policy if that's what the request is.
May I for a second, Ms. Bolton?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think, Ms. Brody, I think that's it. And, at the end of the day, thinking like if all of us were to vanish tomorrow, and by us, I mean me and my board colleagues, we would want the people who replace us to be able to have something to fall back on and say, this is why it's supposed to be this way. And so I think y'all did do a great job at this, but I hear what Ms. Bolton's saying. If we could just maybe include some of that language to just sort of tighten it up, I think that would make me more comfortable too. Again, when I think about that, we were to all vanish, tomorrow, and a new group of people came in, we'd want them to have the same fidelity to it. So,
got it. We've got it.
Cool, awesome, no problem. Anything from?
Sorry.
Oh no, you're good, Dan. Anything from Bolton or Lindy? Are we good? And then, all right, Dan, go ahead.
I was just going to say we'll work on that and bring it back to you next month for another review.
Great. Love it. All right, policy for COVID-19 vaccination requirement for staff. Now, this is, for those watching, this is a brand new policy and something we discussed at our last policy committee meeting to see what a draft of a policy may look like. Ms. Stephanie Scott, who you see in the orange there in the back, Ms. Stephanie Scott had done her research and found that there is precedent for policies like this in public school districts around the country. And so Ms. Bolton, Mr. Lindy, and myself are interested in seeing what one may look like. And so this will be the first time we've seen it and or talked about it, I should say. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to see it. So I'll kick it over to you, Ms. Scott, I assume, or Mr. Hoying. Great.
Basically, the policy you have, based on our conversation at the last policy meeting, we weren't able to find. We're still, researching, but to date, we haven't seen a public school district who's instituted this mandate yet. So basically, the policy that you see before you is kind of a draft based on the EEOC kind of guidelines, and then also some best practice in general in just kind of the industry for employers, private employers. So that's what this current draft is. So we did learn that there are several colleges who have taken the stab at mandating COVID vaccines for the fall. And, the policies are pretty similar to this, but we haven't located a public school district yet. So just wanted you to be aware that we could be one of the first if we decided to move in this direction. So, and we can discuss some other pros and cons, but didn't know if you had any initial reactions to this initial draft so far.
Oh, that's great. I did not. Yeah, I did not know that piece about being one of the first. That's excellent. All right. So I'll kick it to my colleagues. Anybody want to go first? Ms. Bolton?
Yes, I appreciate the beginning, and I think it's great. My only thing that I kept circling was that it is, and I didn't know if this is required by law or it is just sort of the beginning of the boilerplate. I circled the word employees throughout, meaning are we required to limit it only to folks that are employed by us? Or, considering all the people that are in and out of our buildings, our partners, our tutors, our private lesson providers at SCPA, it's, Project Grad, all those folks, the resource board. Because some of those are not necessarily our employees, at least 4 of them or 6 of them are. What's the requirement regarding limiting it only to employees?
I don't think there's necessarily a legal requirement per se. I think, again, this is kind of based on best practice language that's currently out there. So, again, I think that's open for discussion. I think we have the purview for as far as anyone that comes in our building to kind of dictate how we want to manage that. I think with employees, it's probably the greatest group, I guess, that we would have some type of authority as far as, I guess, if they did not. I guess with those other partners, we could just limit our contracts or terminate our contracts. But employees, probably that would have a much greater impact to the operations of whether or not our employees were vaccinated or not. So I think it's more so that conversation, what is the impact to the district and how broad we do want to apply it if we choose to go that direction.
I totally buy the employee piece, totally. And I just think maybe just the way our district runs, whether it's people under contract or people that have access to the building or contact with students, just like we if you have contact with students and you're going to be by yourself, there's the police check and all those sorts of that. Just thinking about how that might be expanded without being crazy.
Right.
I don't want a grocery list, but it might be broader as to if we could think about it. But this is a wonderful start, and I'd be thrilled if we're the first to do it.
Ben?
Thanks, Mike. And Stephanie, thanks for sharing this with us. I had 2 questions, and I want to, if you shared the answers to them already, I apologize. Just I won't make you repeat it. But I think one is, as I've heard other employers talk about this, including my own, some of the issues that come up are around some healthcare privacy issues, at least as I've heard others explain it. And I'm not an expert on this area of law at all. I was just hoping to hear you explain, like, is there a way in which some employee could claim, like I have some healthcare privacy interest in not telling you whether I've gotten a vaccine or not, and that would somehow stymie a policy like this, or not? And I just want to learn more about that. And then second, I happen to think this is a good idea. I also think that it could be controversial, and I would love to hear your take on why you think it's worth it or not worth it, given the potential reaction to it. Those were my 2 questions.
Sure. As far as the first question, as far as staff, we are able legally to require staff to show proof of vaccination. Now, also, that information should be kept confidential to protect those staff persons' privacy, but they couldn't necessarily claim that as the reason for not providing it to us as their employer, if that makes sense.
Stephanie, is that true for any employer, or are we special for some reason because we're a public entity or a school district, or like, and can any employer say, if you want to work here, you got to have a vaccine?
As far as I understand, that is the guidance from the EEOC that we are able to do. So it's employer based, not necessarily just because we're a school district or a public entity.
Okay. It's just fascinating the way you hear different things out there in the atmosphere. And I certainly know people that be wrong about the law all the time. But it's helpful to hear that. So thank you.
And then your second question, I guess, was more so about the pros and cons. Is that kind of generally what you were asking?
Yeah, I think both pros and cons in your recommendation. Like or somebody in the administration's recommendation.
Well, I think, like you said, it is probably going to be a controversial issue just based on the research that we've done, and there's not many examples out there yet, at least within the public school district sphere. Of course, the pros are, it's the safeguard against health and creating a healthy environment for the students and every staff member and person, as we've already discussed, that walks in our doors. It allows us to kind of limit probably some of the quarantining and being able to give our environment, have more stability in our workforce and things of that nature as we enter into the next school year. But there are, there are some cons in considering it. We've already discussed that even with the mandate, that staff can, have a religious or kind of a disability exemption, in which we would have to provide a reasonable accommodation unless we could prove there was some undue hardship or substantial health risk. And so those would be that would be on an individualized basis where we have to take that into consideration. And you would also have to assume that some staff and employees would still not want to get a vaccine separate from a religious or disability reason. They may just decide they don't want to come to work. So we would have to really weigh how many people we thought that could possibly be, because that would also be a detrimental hit to our workforce, and how would we accommodate for possible staffing loss. So, because based on, I guess, our history, we opened up the possibility, or at least opened up the opportunity for staff to get vaccinated. So you have to assume that a lot of our staff and employees left that haven't been vaccinated have kind of already made this calculated decision. So I would assume that we should probably assume that there would be a large percentage of resistance. Some of those people may have been educated from now until then and possibly have changed their mind. But I think the fact that we've given staff the opportunity to get vaccinated up to that point by instituting this mandate, we're probably largely requiring it to people who've made the decision so far that they don't want to. So we would have to take into consideration what the fallout from that could be. And then something else that an article that Dan had shared with me, there's also the issue kind of raised that there could be some union issues. If we have union represented employees, that it might be something that might actually have to be bargained for or negotiated. Considering that currently right now, COVID isn't really a state required vaccine as some of the other ones are. So we would have to take that in consideration as well. So we might need some more, get a gauge of how much union support we would have behind having this type of mandate and things of those nature. So those are just some of the initial ones based on our research.
Can I just add
Yes.
to that? So the fact that this is probably a new policy, a precedent setting, we'd be a little bit, I think, just covering new ground here. And so not to say we've not done that before, we often have, the school district often has, but I think it's our job to ensure that you know what you're getting into if you want to take this step. I think the fact that we're a public employer actually brings in issues that don't impact a private employer, especially with issues of privacy. It's possible that there could be some kind of a privacy challenge here. The fact that we're a unionized employer brings in different challenges. Now, and I say this knowing we've got some union friends that are listening in today. I will applaud that our unions were absolutely standing with us when we were encouraging employees to be tested, when we mandated testing. The unions supported us in that. When we rolled out vaccinations, they were absolutely standing next to us and encouraging their members to be vaccinated. So while I'm hopeful that this could be something that they would support as well, I will say that it's not something that has been necessarily discussed or vetted with them yet. I feel like it's got to be something that the board goes in eyes wide open, saying this is something we're going to support, knowing that there's the possibility of different ways that it might be challenged. So that's all I'll say. As your lawyers, we like to be right in the middle. Not the first guys, not the last. but as board members and our district, like what's something fun about representing CPS is often that's not the path that the board chooses for us. We are often a trend setting district, and that makes it enjoyable for us as well. So eyes wide open, but we're prepared to move forward if this is something the board supports.
I'm going to get to you in a sec, Ms. Bolton. Do we know what percentage of our employees have been vaccinated?
We don't exactly. We do not have records. We have not asked for verification. We will say, I will say that given the number of vaccinations that were administered during the time that CPS was offering vaccinations, we believe it to be significantly higher than the general population. I want to say the general population is between 35 and 50% right now, and we believe our employee complement to be closer to 60 to 75%. That is incredibly just speculative, but we gave away a lot of vaccines during the time that we were offering it, which is cool.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. All right, Eve?
Yeah, eyes wide open. I would expect our attorneys to do what they're doing in preparing us for whatever battles there will be. And certainly we have a number of battles coming up that were going to be controversial, whether it's the cops or whether it's a curriculum controversy that's hitting the nation at this point in time. So I'm happy to shy away from any unnecessary damage after what we've been through, but eyes wide open, I think we should go ahead for you to continue to work on this, because I think and I'll sound like finance chair, but it seems to me that you choose your first and best defense for both our employees and our students and our families. And I think the vaccination has proven to be the best defense. It would also get us away from some of the masking that we will feel, I think, is going to continue to a certain extent. I certainly buy the religious issues and certainly the medical issues, and have a question about that. Is an employer able to say, okay, if for medical reasons and religious reasons you are not able to get the vaccination, are we able as an employer to assign that employee that has those restrictions to a less of a contact assignment, so that we're not terminating anybody because of it necessarily, but it can impact the assignment of that employee for only those two reasons?
Well, I guess again, that would be, up to the board to ultimately decide in some ways how we would want to respond to that in an official policy. But specifically, yes, it would just be dependent upon what positions were available and what the skill set of that person is. So it would kind of be an individualized decision based on those two things. What positions were available, what skill set they were trying to do. Some positions that might not be possible, depending on the skill set of what is required of the job. You can't be a custodian remotely. So, and then what other, skill sets would that person have? Is there another type of job that they could do instead? So.
Just to add to that individual determination is the key. And if I can brag on our district, we did a very good job, I think, our HR department, of considering. There were so many requests for accommodations over the last year, so many requests. And we looked at each individual case. And if you saw some of the litigation around the country, especially in school districts, was related to school districts that came up with just a wholesale, one size fits all. And particularly Minneapolis and some of the other school districts around, courts found that to be inadequate in terms of dealing with folks with disabilities, and it would be the same here. So. Unfortunately, a school district doesn't necessarily, it's not like a law firm where you can just say, well, you're working remotely or whatever. Many of our employees, teachers, custodians, cafeteria workers, trades folks, their job sort of necessarily requires them to be in person and working around. There are some jobs where we can make those kind of accommodations, but just the nature of our employee complement, lots of jobs, it's more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult to accommodate.
But the law, at least as we understand it, and there's a whole body of law about accommodating, especially in the workplace. I can remember as county recorder when people figured out that the big property books and deed books were too heavy for many people to lift, then you had to make accommodations, or you had to make sure that a person in a wheelchair could reach the stand-up desks. So I mean, but we would need to accommodate for those two reasons if we at all could, or make all that. That's important to know. I think too, a first line of defense. The more we're able to do this with the vaccine, and the earliest that we can do it, so that people aren't coming into the workforce not knowing that this could be a requirement. I think that's problematic, but it also would save us much mitigation. Because frankly, we are now set up to have several or many or dozens of mitigating conditions that not only cost us money and time, but something I heard this morning, even the fact that our children are wearing masks is impacting their development regarding facial expressions. I mean, something that it doesn't seem significant, but it is to the core. So I'm very much in favor of you going back and trying to figure out how to write it so that we can be leaders as well as properly accommodating.
Ben, do you have anything to add?
I think I would just say I am certainly open to us doing this policy as a board. I think there's more conversation to have first from my perspective, because of all the things we're talking about today. And also, like, if we do decide this is the right thing to do, we ought to be able to stand with a whole series of other stakeholders and make that kind of announcement and decision together. I think that's something for the administration to lead probably rather than us. But, like, if we're going to do this, it would be great to do this alongside our employees, our parents, some kids, so that there is a team of stakeholders saying this is the direction we want to go together. And I think we have, my understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, is that we have time to do that. Not like a bazillion years, but a couple weeks. And so I'm not saying we have to go in that direction, but if you were asking me today how I feel about all this, that's where this one board member is.
Okay. Appreciate that, Ben. Appreciate your comments too, Eve. And I'll just wrap this up. I, perhaps unsurprisingly, am in favor of a policy of this nature. And I would add, as I did last month, I'd be interested to see at our next meeting if there is any model language for students being vaccinated. If we're going to have all our employees be vaccinated, I think it only makes sense, to take that extra step. And maybe, it's not something the board wants to entertain, but just have something to look at, I think would be good. Also, there is a sense of urgency to this, though, because while it's May, we don't meet in July. And by the time we meet in August, school will have started, which means, our next meeting of policy is at the end of June. I don't know that there's a board meeting after that. There may be, but my point is if this is something we decide to do, it would have to come out of policy at the end of June and then somehow be passed and communicated by the middle of July. And I don't see a scenario where that's necessarily possible, to be honest. So if there's any way a new version of this could be sent to us, whenever you have it. I see Eve has her hand up, so I'll pause for a second.
Mike, you are so right about the urgency piece, and I think we would. And Ben's right about a wider discussion. The wider discussion would be with the board.
Yeah.
And the opportunity for that would be for attorneys and with an action line, so to speak, be able to present to us another rendition but that it would be an action item that they would then submit so that we could take it for broader discussion on the 7th. And then the very next meeting that we would have would not be a policy meeting. We've met policy-wise, would be the 16th, where ideally, from employment standpoint, that's where it would be passed after a fuller board discussion. And then holding off till and introducing the student thing, that might not pass, but that can almost be delayed. And then there's only one meeting in July and that's a whole board meeting if it's needed. But I think both of you are right. There's an urgency to it, as you're saying, and Ben's saying there needs to be a wider discussion. The board already sent this to policy. We didn't just come up with this on our own, and there has been a brief two brief board discussions about this possibility. So I would encourage us to have something to bring to the board for discussion, and then rewrite if necessary. Passage on the 16th, which is a Wednesday meeting in June.
Excuse me, that's a committee of the whole meeting. It won't be a voting meeting.
Yes, that's right. New thing. We'd have to figure that out.
Well, so June 28th, there's a business meeting, and so that would be after the next policy. So we could talk about it one more time in policy, put it on the agenda June 28th, and then we say July 19th if we need it. Well, if we can't make a decision on June 28th, then we need it. And then that's what we meet in July so we can talk about this again. But to your point, this is something that's already in the board's mind. So June 7th, I am going to list this as a board matters item. If we need it, we may not need it. Maybe we'll have a good enough discussion in the presentation in the minutes. But regardless, I'm going to email Phyllis right now. And we can get it talked about, really kick it around then, and then we'll have good feedback for our June meeting, and then June 28th, folks are amenable. Because Ben's right, we need to bring this back. It's a big deal, and so we need everyone else's eyes on it. So does that make sense, Dan?
Yeah, just in terms of, I'm sure you want the board members to have a chance to see the draft before June 7th. Is it this draft that you're asking us to send to board members, or is there any specific additions that you're asking for before the June 7th?
I say we give them this unless my colleagues feel otherwise and see what they say. And then, we can bring up the things we've talked about, like Ms. Bolton's point of should it be broader than employees. Eve?
I'd like to see a redraft based upon today's discussion, where we talk about accommodations or possible accommodations having to be provided, and also a wider definition, because I think that will expedite the discussion or broaden the discussion or make more meaningful the discussion on the 7th.
I'm fine with that.
And I tell you, to Ben's point too, and yours, Mike, it wouldn't be bad to arrange testimony, if you will, even public comment, if indeed some of our union leadership is ready to say something, even in public session and public comment about supporting it as early as the 7th or what have you, because I think there is support for that, for their own safety as well as their students and families.
I agree.
That would be a great united front on that one.
I agree. Okay. Good. Any final thoughts before we move on? Nope. Good conversation. Thank you, Ms. Scott, for putting that together and giving us something to wrap our heads around. It's really important. So appreciate it very much. Our next agenda item, back to responsible bidder. I will kick it over to General Counsel, and then Mr. Lindy will have first opportunity to comment. Sorry, Ms. Bolton. But
No, please.
All right, Mr. Holton.
I'll put a wrench in it later.
Okay.
No, I won't.
Thanks. So per the request of the policy committee, and I'll note that Trina Levens, our purchasing director has joined us as well in this, so she may have an interest in jumping into this conversation as well. Per the request of the committee at April's meeting, I took a look at 5 different policies which are clearly sort of overlapping, somewhat duplicative, and I will also say perhaps somewhat in need of additional review, and consolidated those into a single policy that I'm saying 6320, purchasing of goods and services. I'm glad to put it up on the screen in a second here, but for the most part, there is, I don't think, anything new in terms of this is a consolidation. It's not it's not that we've proposed new goals or new quotas or anything like that. It's just kind of a consolidation of what we have so far. As we've discussed, what I saw could be in our current policies could generally be put into about 4 or 5 different buckets. Bucket 1 would be that the board has mandated that we not discriminate against vendors on the basis of protected classifications, and that our vendors not discriminate against their employees based on protected classifications. The only thing that's really added, I think, to that is there was nothing, I think, in the policy that explained what a person could do if an employee of a vendor, if they felt that the vendor was violating that requirement. And so I added a paragraph at the bottom of page 1 to say that a person who believes that a vendor or contractor of CPS is violating this policy should submit such information to either the Diversity and Inclusion Officer or the Office of General Counsel. The second big bucket would be the sort of board's initiative to have local hire, to look first to vendors who are within the Cincinnati area, who employ the parents of CPS students, and then in particular the invitation and promotion of vendors and contractors who employ CPS's own students, especially its career technical students. So that's bucket 2. Bucket 3 is the goals that were set out really back in 2004, and this is where I say we probably need some updating, to contract with minority-owned, women-owned, disadvantaged, and small business enterprises. Bucket 4 was the sort of how this all fits together, the determination of the lowest responsible bidder. So when we have a bid, how does this all fit together? And then finally, this is an add, is the requirement that Board Member Lindy suggested in terms of having bidders disclose information about whether their employees live within the CPS area, whether they provide a healthcare plan to their employees, whether they contribute to a pension or retirement program, and whether they maintain an apprenticeship program. Finally, I'll add that this again is not something new, but was already included in our policies, that a CPS vendor with an average gross revenue of $350,000 must certify that its employees are covered by a health and welfare plan. I'll say that the feedback I've gotten on that was that may be outdated as well, that $350,000 threshold was set probably in the early 2000s, and we may need to look at that threshold. And again, the reason being that sometimes these things can conflict with one another. A requirement like this to ensure that a health plan is in place may not always be something that a small local or otherwise disadvantaged business, these things don't always work together. So this is clearly a draft, mostly a consolidation. Trina's on the line too. I don't know if she has anything to add. No,
Yes.
yeah, there's Trina. Hi,
Can you hear
friend.
me? Hi, how are
Yeah.
you? How's everybody doing? So I agree. I like the fact, but one thing I want to say about it is we're in purchasing, and just to make sure that we're upholding to these policies when it comes to our vendors and when it comes to our contracts, our RFPs. I just want to know because we have so many contracts coming through. We manage the RFPs because we put them out there for bidding. And then in our evaluation, we can actually put some stipulation in there to where they have to give us this information. But when it comes to our contracts, and things of that nature. Construction, most of this bidded out. I can see that, but the line drawn is where I'm trying to get at when it comes to asking for this information. Contracts that come through purchasing and Cincinnati Public Schools versus request for proposals, which is a little easier to ask for because we're bidding it out versus the contracts just coming through here. And so, unless in our contracts and actually the for like the budget managers that actually do the contracts and want those particular consultants or people to come into the building and do the services, we tell them that these criteria have to be set in their contract. So that's where I just kind of want to make sure, just do we update all our contracts to say that we need all this information, and or are we just looking at mostly the RFPs? And similar to what Dan had mentioned about our disadvantaged vendors as well, how's that where would they fit into that if they're not able to provide that? And we're trying to make sure that we have an equitable vendor pool out there is what I'm trying to say. Number 3, the contracting with minority owned. I do definitely think this needs to be updated like Dan had mentioned. And I'm so excited about the DEI person starting because they're actually going to be working with purchasing too to help with our vendor management on disadvantage and our supply diversity. So I'm excited to hear and see that we're going to have someone in place to help us with that and also the training. So with me, I'm okay with this policy and everything being combined together, but I just want to make sure on my end, because it is a purchasing of goods and services and it's held in my department, that I'm making sure that my team and we're upholding this policy and doing it in the right way. That's it for me. I just want to make sure that I'm really understanding exactly where I need to put this information and making sure that we are we are upholding to all our policies for the district.
Appreciate it. Thank you. If there's nothing else from council, I'm gonna open it up. Okay, great. Mr. Lindy, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody, Dan, for the work you did. Trina, great to have you on, and thank you for your questions and comments too. I think we should make sure we get Trina an answer to her question about kind of where this would apply, and I think there could be any number of good answers to that. I think for my part, I really liked the consolidation. I really just had 2 things that I wanted to ask for. One was in the section 5, where it says item D, whether the bidder has maintained or participated in an apprenticeship program. I would love to add like an apprenticeship program that is, oh gosh, lost my notes here, team. Registered with the Ohio State Apprenticeship Council. The reason I wanted to do that is I think it's a good vetting test of the kind of apprenticeship program that we're talking about. And I also think that, what we're asking for in, I think, all of these sections is disclosure. Not necessarily that any one of these items would be like the only decision maker in what. So that was going to be my request, number 1. And I think request number 2 And this gets, I think it's what some of what Trina was saying. I don't know whether we have to put this in the policy language or it can be just something that we do. But I thought that once a year, at least, it would be really good to have some kind of presentation on how these different bidding requirements actually wound up getting applied as we've looked at contracts that have come in. To your point, Dan, like these don't always point in the same direction. So we'd say like, okay, over the last quarter, over the last year, here's a summary of the different bids that were coming in, what I'm describing is not the only way to do this. It's one way to do this. But here's how they scored against the different things we care about. Here's where we landed. Let's have a discussion about whether or not this is in line with what the law requires and what our values are. And then we could strengthen it over time. But just some way of getting some visibility into how this gets applied, and having a discussion about that here seems really powerful and really important.
Okay. Both of those make sense. That makes sense to me. Ms. Bolton, do you have comments on this consolidation?
I think the consolidation is very needed, and I think it's been a good product from policy discussion.
Yeah.
I would like, though, to reiterate the importance of maybe General Counsel looking into this contracting for equity, because this does seem, which is a movement in the country, and also having looked at this again, there's something out of the World Bank that calls for inclusive business model. I mean, it's just it's new language, at least for me, and it seems much more in keeping maybe with our anti-racism and anti-racism policy and us trying to broaden who we are. So, I mean, I would just suggest as they continue the drafting of this through the consolidation, just to kind of become familiar with what some of that new terminology is or new practices. I think it might inform it. Second, trying not to use, as I think Dan mentioned, the 2004 supplier diversity program as any justification for anything. Having lived through the FMP, we had to almost have, like, people burn their mortgage. We almost had to put that document in at Fountain Square and torch it because it was not good enough to use, and unfortunately we were using it. I mean, it was a stab in the dark, but it caused more controversy and showed us more of the problems as we went through FMP, when indeed it became an issue about contracting. And Trina's point about the disadvantaged, if you will, vendors, or the vendors less likely to compete during that FMP piece, especially for minority or startups or whatever, or even vendors that have been around a long time but had limited networks because of economic racism, frankly, and people working within their network. We actually had to pay for vendors' performance bonds to actually give them a chance to compete with the larger, more established networks. And again, from that contracting for equity, I continue to say some of the things that are part of the responsible bidder part really are part leftover of the more institutionalized economic networks where the same people get the same sorts of jobs and vendors. So, there's an article some years ago, and I'm with Ben about the apprenticeship. I just want to make sure that the 3 members of that council that are employee representatives have some connection to unions, although very frankly, apprenticeships and unions have not always been the most open and fair either. So I love the consolidation, and I know that Trina has to figure this out. I think this includes everything that we do regarding contracts in the way that it can be. But those would just be things I'd suggest as we look at it. But we're on our way, and I'm glad too. Again, moving more offices into the diversity officer is got to be part of this.
Great. I don't have any further comments except or questions aside from like what's next. I think this has been an awesome use of the policy committee's time. So thank you, Mr. Lindy, for bringing this up. We have, I think, ended up doing more work than we even maybe intended when it started. I mean, this opened up all kinds of things, right? And this consolidated policy, potential policy, is a great product. So it sounds like it's about at the finish line. I'm curious, like, what is next? And Dan, if you want to recount what you've heard, because it feels like we're about there. The addition of the language, which I also concur with. What do you see is next?
Yeah, I think it's terrific feedback. And actually, just to call out a couple, I really appreciate that Board Member Lindy mentioning that having a review, having that built into this policy. That's actually something we do and have done. And actually, often it's, I think, been policy committee that's done it. It's either policy or finance. I'm not sure. But I know that during FMP, during FMP, I think Robin was coming quarterly or maybe more than that to report literally how much business was going out and where it was going. More recently, I think we've been doing it annually. And Board Member Bolton, help me out, but I can't remember if that's been done in policy or in finance and whether the board has a preference.
It happens in finance, not only with the review annually of the contracts, but the supplier diversity. The attempt has been to at least have an annual review of those numbers, particularly as it pertains to comparing it to what the city has been doing. And Trina is the one that reports, and prior to her. And frankly, the FMP piece of the supplier diversity predates Robin, where it would have been our folks in charge, of the whole FMP itself. So but that supplier diversity piece that needs to be looked at as well. And
yep.
But please, let's get this language in this decade, or let's get it up to date with. I mean, some of these. Come on. We want to be.
The other good feedback I appreciate is the invitation to remove the reference to the 2004 resolution.
Yes.
So we will make sure that happens as well.
We can have a virtual burning of the supplier diversity 2004.
Can I get one comment in here, Mike and Eve?
Yeah.
So I was on, I can't, this might be what you're referring to, Dan, it might not be. I was on finance last year, and I remember the meeting where we had the review of all the contracts. The thing I don't remember from that meeting, and it could be that you're referencing a different meeting, or it could be that I missed it in that meeting, is like, what role did the different bidder criteria play in influencing which contracts we selected? It was very top to bottom here, all the contracts we're doing, what they're for, why we believe they're important, why we think they're the right thing to do. But it was less about, like, when we were choosing from among different options, which pieces of the bidder language did the work in shaping how our choices played out.
I know finance has done the sort of December cattle call of every big contract in the district, but I think we have in the past been even more specific about supplier diversity and what percentage.
So I may just have missed it. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Right, Ms. Bolton?
I think Dan's right, and Ben's not to be blamed for not being able to remember the supplier diversity, because I know there was a delay, especially as we wanted to wait to compare to what was the most recent data from the city. Now, when we do that cattle call at the end of the year, that does show the status of the contractors, meaning their minority status, female status, what have you. That does show up in that massive chart, but actual reports on supplier diversity is one report during the year. And Dan's right, it used to be certainly quarterly, and used to be extremely well attended in the big room with the folks that had gotten contracts and the many folks that didn't. So it's let's get in this decade and be very reflective of much more left-winging language that kind of shakes us to our core.
Right. Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Bolton. And we're going to move on unless objections from my colleagues or general counsel. Are we good? Seem we're good? All right. Going once, going twice. Continued review of policies.
Sorry, Mike.
Oh,
sorry. So what is the next step on the bidder policy?
I understand I'll bring a draft back with the changes recommended today to the June meeting. Does that work?
That fast enough for you, Ms. Bolton?
You know me, I like to accelerate great school districts. So yes.
Oh my God. Oh, that was amazing. Make sure that's reflected in the minutes, please. I'm kidding, Pat. Okay. So is that okay? Well, I was going to ask if that's okay with you, Ben. Is that work? And then that Monday after that, we can put it to the full board.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. It's like we can get this to the full board on June 28th for passage.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
That'd
Thanks,
be
everybody.
great.
Appreciate it.
All right. I'm going to accelerate this great policy committee agenda. That was amazing. Continued review of policies, human resources policies.
Okay, so on to the 3000 and 4000 series. Paul McDole's with us, of course, as well. These relate to our employment policies. We have two sets of nearly identical policies that the 3000 series applies to professional staff. That would be essentially licensed staff, and then the 4000 series is classified staff, which is a civil service designation. Many of these policies are identical, so reviewing one and making changes to one, we can make the changes to the other. There are some policies that are unique. So for today's meeting, what I proposed was reviewing 3111, creating a position, which matches with 4111. And then 3111.1 is selection of principals, and 3112 is board employee communications. That matches with 4112. I'll start sharing just to put up 3111. Sorry, hold on one second. This is creating a position and relates to essentially the board's ability. It's got kind of an awkward reference here to our immigration rules, which of course we hire only folks who are legally authorized to work in the U.S. That's law, not necessarily, and then describes the board's right to create positions and to create new positions and give what considerations are used in creating positions. Glad to answer any questions or receive any feedback.
Ms. Bolton?
Two things. One, of course, is that one that employs only United States citizens is obviously something that is crazy, but rather than authorized to work in the United States.
Right.
This policy, reflecting on the last few years, the issue of creating positions as a board function, I think needs to be reconsidered, largely because of the number of positions that have been added, but not necessarily created. I mean, this is adding to what? The civil service classification. I mean, maybe there could be some definition here.
Sorry. Yeah. Are you looking at a specific provision within the policy?
Perhaps, because it certainly hasn't necessarily been the practice or long time discussion or what have you of creating positions. I don't know what the guidelines are for the administration. I know certain things. I would be confused as to the number of times the board has participated in the creation of positions. So obviously, I know superintendent adds positions, and maybe they aren't new positions, but noticing how old this is to begin with, and the size once of the central office versus the size of the central office now, this might need some further discussion, or we might have to see the guidelines that the administration has used to do this.
Paul may want to jump in. I think to answer your question, I think the board creates positions in two ways. One is sort of directly when, for example, when the board passed the anti-racism policy, establishing a new position for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Here's our friend Paul. And second is through the superintendent's report when the board approves positions that are recommended by the superintendent.
I agree that that's when it happens, but I'm not sure that reflects the policy even as it is written here. I mean, the justifications, the exercise of the authority to create new positions, the district shall give the primary considerations to this or that. And positions we have expanded our capacity to create positions, and it does, and it's, I won't say that it's bad. I'm just saying that this policy really does not speak to the limits or the kinds of conditions that and who is supposed to. You know, I think the superintendent should be in charge of this, but I don't know that as a board member in the last many years, I can think that I felt good about that we were doing this in this manner, or if there's a better way to do it.
So the ask is, if I'm correct, to relook at this policy in light of how positions are sort of actually created. Most times it's, I think, a recommendation of the superintendent. That's the request?
That's the major request. And the other piece is defining it as position versus job, or adding positions. Is it adding a new position to the HR structure, or is it we're adding numbers of the same position? I mean, this is unclear to me. And I guess the revised code will tell us that, but I didn't take the time to read the cited portions. And definitely, please do something about you can only be an American.
Yes, got that.
That's Hazel P.
Got it. We'll take that feedback and any other feedback and bring it back.
Ben?
Nothing additional here, Mike. Thanks.
All right, Dan, let's go on to the next one.
Okay, the next one applies just to the 3000 series and relates to the selection of principals.
Mm-hmm.
This involves the LSDMCs, the local school decision-making committees. There's essentially the process involves the superintendent having a pool of candidates and recommending to the LSDMC a minimum of 3 to interview. Prior to that, the LSDMC, of course, looks at sort of its needs and wants for the school and then interviews those candidates in light of those needs. The LSDMC then refers a recommendation back to the superintendent, who ultimately has the responsibility for selecting principals. This process is generally led by our assistant superintendents, Amat, Murphy, and Bunty. I asked them to look at it, and in general, I think they felt like this matches the process that's used for selecting a principal. Glad to answer any questions about this policy.
I have a quick one if I can go first, if that's okay. I'm fine with it. I'm just curious, in your opinion, or Miss Brody, if she has one, if any OPES stuff needs to be included in there. Particularly, there's really only one section, the letter A, number 4, that talks about, superintendent review. Is there anything that needs to be added, or is it square?
You want to jump in?
Well, Ms. Brody has been replaced by the talented and good-looking Paul McDole.
He is good looking. You know what? And that's maybe it's with the mask on. I couldn't tell the difference.
Mike, you're exactly correct. It helps quite a bit. I think in looking at number 4, Mr. Morowski, if there was the will of the board to do so or policy committee, I think that's where it would be added there. Just referencing that that's what the use of the evaluation that we're using.
Cool. Yeah, I'd say, I'm all about tightening up and making things, the crossover, and someone can look at one and it makes sense to the other. Even if it's only 2 words, I think it's worth it. So cool. That'll be my only recommendation then, and I'll go to Ben.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Hey, so Dan and Paul and Stephanie, is 2 a change from what's been there, A2? Or is it the same?
That's the same.
Somehow I had it in my head that like the LSDMC made the final decision among the candidates. And then what I'm reading there is that they basically create a report that should be considered carefully by the superintendent who would make the final decision. And that seems like a big difference. And I might just have always been wrong, but I wanted to ask about that.
So the way the process has worked is the candidates that are sent for interview are vetted here at the district. We have a assessment center that each individual would have to go through first, scored, and then when principal positions are posted, we then have those individuals apply, or we share those names with the LSDMC. They conduct their interviews, and then they make a recommendation to the superintendent.
And I think that's been the practice for some time, Ben.
Yeah,
Mr. Lindy.
Mr. Lindy, it was really important. I know over the last probably 4 years, we've put a real strong focus on making sure that the candidates are vetted before they go to the LSDMC for interviews. So that way, we are making sure that any name that comes as a recommendation to the superintendent, that we're comfortable to move that forward to the board.
I got it. It's a subtle difference, and I think I was just incorrect. And so I appreciate the information. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Lindy, and I want to get to Ms. Bolton. I think there's a common misconception. I mean, I certainly hear it in the community every now and then that the LSTMC, quote, hires the principal, which is not the case, and it hasn't ever been. This has been the way it is. But I do hear what you're saying, and I do think that kind of gets said quite casually. And it might be 9.9 times out of 10 the superintendent takes a recommendation, but at the end of the day, they're not. That's not their job. So, Ms. Bolton?
Yes, overall, I think this is actually a very good policy, even though it has so much procedure in it. I think it's one of the most read policies, at least out in the schools, for obvious reasons. I do like Mike's reference, though, and maybe it goes somewhere in the description of how the pool gets determined. To Paul's point, they're not going to send any names to the LSTMC that the superintendent couldn't live with, but it does fall to the LSTMCs to make a recommendation. But there might be some references to what kind of standards are used, so it's a little bit clearer as to how the pool gets flushed, if you will. But so I'd add that. I would also take out the number 5, special consideration shall be given to ensure quality leadership for redesigned schools. That I'm not even sure what that means. I know that's still a term that we have, but I don't think that's fair to say to other schools as well. But beyond that, I think this is a great policy, and yes, it goes to the heart. I will say there's more understanding since we've worked hard on LSTMCs recently. There's greater understanding. We did the whole handbook of the role they play. But maybe it's describing maybe some of the criteria as to how the pool is determined that then goes to the LSTMC. And to Ben's point, we have also had any number of occasions, and Paul will testify to this, where the LSTMC does refuse the 3 people from the pool. and then it gets delayed or an interim goes in or whatever. So they have an extraordinary amount of power in their definition and also in some degree of right of refusal. But it really is a pool that comes from central office, rightfully so.
Great.
Can I ask a question about that? I noticed number 5 as well, Ms. Bolton, and whether it still made sense. It felt, I'll just say, it felt a little awkward as well to me to have special consideration given to the leadership of redesigned schools. Does it make sense for us still to have that in there, or is that are we at a point where we can remove number 5?
To my way of thinking, you can remove it as a term of art that doesn't make any sense any longer. But it wouldn't be bad to necessarily say, special considerations to the individual needs of particular schools or something or whatever. If you had to keep a number 5 there, but that redesign thing, that's I think currently there are no redesigned schools by definition.
Yeah, we agree.
Okay.
And I know Mr. Lindy has to hop off pretty soon, and we're almost to other business. But Ben, whenever you have to go, feel free, and I'll of course keep you updated. If there are no
I
more,
appreciate that.
yeah,
I just want to say thank you, everybody, and thanks for all your hard work. I have no other new business, so I'm happy to take whatever next steps are helpful.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Everybody. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend.
All right, Ben, and then we're moving along. These last couple here, lead us through these couple similar.
Yeah, the last one is a policy that's called Board Employee Communication. It relates, and I'll bring it up on the screen. It relates both to employees' communications with the board and the board's communications with employees. I thought it was ironic that Ms. Bolton pointed out how closely the last policy was followed. I'm not sure that's the case with this policy. And again, there is an out, of course, for protected First Amendment speech, but if followed directly, the policy would dictate and mandate that employees' communications to the board are directed through the superintendent. I think that's certainly done on official matters. I mean, I think the superintendent obviously dictates kind of what presentations are going to be made to the board, et cetera. But certainly there's lots of private communications from employees to board members, including in our hearing of the public and everything else. And then board communications to employees, again, those communications are done through the superintendent. And then finally, a public discussion of district matters. So I'm glad to answer your questions or go in whatever direction you'd like in this policy.
Miss Bolton.
This too should just be burned on Fountain Square and a brand new one come to fruition.
100%.
This is not real. I mean, this is not real. Parts of it should be realer than it is, but this doesn't even describe the new world where people have such access.
I'm really happy to hear you say that, Eve. And as I read this, I've only been on the board. Well, I can't say only anymore. I guess 4 years. And not one time when I read this policy, and in my head I was like, is this real? Is this how it's supposed to happen? First of all, to say yes, in practice this is not remotely close to reality, but I will add my personal and elected, I guess, opinion. I don't think that this should be. I mean, this is like employees can't talk to board members. So again, to Ms. Bolton's point, some of this I think is appropriate. I do. But all in all, I think we need a new. So, do we just want
on it?
All right, cool.
Sounds like an excellent assignment for the Assistant General Counsel.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, good luck. I'm sure there's no, strong feelings in anyone on this
No,
policy at all.
absolutely.
Not at all hornet's nest.
Awesome.
Forgive me, but let me add just a little history.
Yeah.
Having lived through just at CPS, 3 superintendents, Mrs. Blackwell's approach was this policy. And by God, it got practiced. And that was it. I remember Chris Nelms wanting to reach out to employees and say something pleasant, and we weren't even allowed to send a letter or a note or email. Then we lived through Mary, who created a much more open culture until it went farther than Mary wanted it to go, and then now mostly all hell has broken loose, and people think they can say anything at all. So there has to be something that makes sense here that recognizes the new world that we're in and the access, the permanent, immediate access that people have. And nobody knows how to behave anymore anyway, so fix it.
We'll work on it.
Cool.
Okay.
It looks like, is there one more? Am I seeing this correct, Ann? You got one more for us, or?
I think that's the HR policies. 4112 is identical to 3112.
Right. Great. So we have other business, and then we'll do hearing of the public. So 2 minutes, 2 minutes a pop. If you would like to speak during hearing of the public, raise your hand now. You will be recognized by our general counsel, and when the time comes, he will put you in the feed. If you want a response, please include your email, and that's that. So other business, I have a few items for other business, but I will defer to Ms. Bolton if she has anything.
Mine are fast, and I communicated to General Counsel again the interest regarding dual enrollment internally, so that our students are they allowed to go. We've talked about this once before. Are they allowed to go to more than one of our schools for different programs? An example being not having to go to Hughes necessarily to be at Zoo School, or not having to be at Aiken next year in order to participate in ROTC. I don't know that it's manageable or doable, but is it legal? And then I think the other one was getting a better grip on what does it mean to be a teacher of record. Because with the development of CDA, as it has emerged, it's possible that students might have more than one teacher of record for even the same course if they're getting it from CDA versus their home school. And whatever you know, great, whatever we can say for next month. But I think that's part of the future for us.
These items might kind of cross over. If I'm not answering your question, please don't hesitate to give me more specific direction here. But I will say this came up most for us this year with the board's direction that students should be allowed to sort of freely transfer and enter into CDA for good reason, because they may have not wanted to attend in person. Or not been able to attend in person. That was sort of the board directive, and not only that the student would be able to transfer back freely, and especially it became an issue with respect to be able to graduate from their home school. So imagine, a Hughes kid who could not attend in person, decided to spend the year at CDA, but still wanted to participate in Hughes prom and Hughes graduate, or whatever, the Hughes graduation, to get a Hughes diploma. That was the direction from the board, and we followed it, but not without a lot of back and forth with ODE, because for EMIS accountability, EMIS is the state's the student reporting system. For accountability purposes, this also goes with teacher of record by the same. The teacher of record is a concept that ODE has developed for the record keeping system. And it's all about accountability. So which school is going to be accountable for that student's grades, attendance, improvement, test scores, etc. Teacher of record is which teacher is going to be accountable for the same things. This became quite complicated because ODE was rightly concerned that with CDA, the Digital Academy has its own IRN. It is its own school, which is unlike most online programs throughout the state. Marymount, for example, if you decided to go remote this year, you were still a Marymount High School student. You never left that IRN, that school's cohort. But at CPS, if you wanted to transfer to CDA, that you are now leaving the Hughes cohort and entering the CDA IRN. That becomes even more complicated if that student is allowed to go back to Hughes to get a Hughes diploma and graduate from Hughes, because what EMIS wants to do is make sure that, Hughes is accountable for its students, CDA is accountable for its students. We hope. The goal was, in our conversations, was to make this as seamless for parents and students as possible. This is not a student or parent issue or problem, not something they should have to worry about. It's only a school district and state Department of Education problem. And I hope we were mostly successful in that. Obviously we don't want to sacrifice, our test scores and our ratings and schools ratings and district ratings. But most important to us, our priority was to try to make sure that this was a seamless process for parents, something they never had to worry about. I haven't gotten a lot of feedback on that. So if you as board members have, I'd be glad to hear it. But that was sort of the issue. And I don't know, again, if that answers your question, Ms. Bolton, but that's the project that was kind of an ongoing, there was a working group to work through that all year.
And I appreciated all the work that happened. And indeed, you answered it completely. I just think that moving forward this has to happen for the future. Of the new CPS. It has to be that seamless move, whether the teacher of record remains in two different IRNs, whether so much of the remote stuff is already done habitually in a number of our schools to get credit, and it's happening. If something is a remote model, does that take care of the IRN? I think we have to find whatever way we can do and can to have our children be able to move seamlessly to program without necessarily losing their home school. I think that's it. It's so important for career ed, and it's so important for the expansion of remote and other services. If we can make that an action item to keep working through that. It is the new CPS, and it is the new education. Thanks.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, couldn't agree more. I would only add to that it's often like that is our mantra, is to follow whatever the board's direction in terms of making our schools as flexible as possible. That's not the issue. The issue is often how that comports with the sort of reporting systems and accountability systems that the state has. And it's not just the state Department of Education. We have similar issues, and part of the working group's issue this year was like OHSAA, the High School Athletic Association, which, if you want to the zoo school at Hughes, but compete on your tennis team at Schroeder, like how does that work? And so, again, our mantra this is to make that as seamless for parents and students as possible, but it often has negative consequences for us in terms of, again, report card data or teachers that are graded or that are evaluated based on student data. We don't want the tail to wag the dog, in other words. So that the importance is making sure that the kids and families have the options available. And then it's sort of our job on the back end to make sure we're not hurt too bad in terms of report card ratings and everything else.
And last thing I'll say is that it requires the restructuring so that it can be done. I mean, it's just going to have to be done in some way that is possible, whether it's teacher of record or whatever. This is the future.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Bolton. I'm inclined to agree. Thanks for bringing that up. And so you're good there. Eve, do you have anything else? Other
Yep,
business?
I'm good. Those are my two.
I got a few things. I'm going to end with what I'm most excited about. But first, so it has kind of been kicked around, and I'm curious, like, what people think about this. I just want some quick feedback, I think. So I'll cut to the chase. Our friends at Taft High School are interested, I think, in maybe letting their lot, which butts up right to the new FCC stadium, which is very nice and seems to be going well. I've talked to some folks down there and their principal about it, and they're interested in, using their lot to have parking for games and make some, some money for their school. I think that's awesome. But if they do that, ostensibly, if you have that awesome of a parking spot for the FC Cincinnati game, you're going to want to tailgate and hang out, and that is going to involve beer, most likely. So I'm curious, this is uncharted territory, I believe. Would that be the type of thing that would require an alcohol waiver or something different that we don't know about? I just wanted to put that out there because I want Taft to be able to make money off of that dang stadium and the people going to it. And if they go to that parking lot, they're not going to go there and walk right to the game. I'm just being realistic. What does that look like? I don't know. Or does it look like nothing and we say it can't be done, which I think would be a shame? Again, I'd love to see them be able to capitalize. Any thoughts?
I'm glad to hear thoughts. I will just add to that Sierra called us with the same concern, and his sort of concern was twofold. One, whether there was an expectation. Obviously, he does expect to make some revenue off of those parking spots, but whether there was an expectation on him and his staff to sort of monitor that, whether that he was expected to go out there and say, hey, put away the can, and secondly, if it's assumed that, look, there may be some tailgating there, he is happy to come present to this committee or to request a waiver, but he doesn't want it to seem like, he doesn't want a board member to walk by and see some drinking going on in the parking lot and say, hey, what is Sierra Badgett doing over there at Taft High School? So he certainly wants to bring it to the attention of the board. He'll handle this however the board would like.
As the one board member who consistently walks through his parking lot, I would never say that, but there might be somebody else who says it. Eve?
I would say it.
You would say it.
I would say it. There's a precedent that we are allowed to do that, use our parking lot for such a thing, and we need to be doing it over the Rhine, across the street from Rothenburg. There are places and Hughes to continue to do it. We should do it everywhere. My concern, and I expressed this to Principal Badgett, we should be making a fortune on that lot. It would require an alcohol waiver. To my way of thinking, it would require CPS staff to be patrolling it, particularly if there is an alcohol waiver. And certainly we would have to call CPS staff to even let people in or out of the parking lot. I think a salute, and I want the money to go to the school, and I don't want it to necessarily be done by a third party to make money, even if it is directly or indirectly for the school. I would want the school to be able to handle it. I think you advertise it as a family-friendly tailgate. There are enough people that are soccer fans that do bring their kids, and that would alleviate some problems. It would also be a better image for our district if indeed that's what it is. You'll fill, what do they have, 40 spaces, or Mike, do you know? I can't remember what Sierra said.
30 or 40, I think.
It's a phenomenal opportunity.
Yeah.
And I just think it would be, make the money, make it family friendly, make a big advertisement about it being family friendly, and it would be a safe place for people to tailgate. And then you don't have the alcohol, and you have young people and also people that are not wanting to imbibe when they're driving. It's a
Sold.
better message.
Sold. I think that makes sense. It's a good compromise, and as long as the money's going to Taft, I think that's key.
Absolutely. Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's good. I mean, Dan, if you want to get with Sierra and kind of pass that along.
I will. I'll circle back with him. He also thought it might be helpful to see a couple of games and to see what kind of clientele they have, and then maybe come back and give an update on that.
Right.
Well, they had Morosky there, so you got to watch out.
That's you never know.
Hey, yeah. Listen, if
Yeah.
I were going, I probably wouldn't be going to the family-friendly one, but I just think that's a better image for the district and the
Right.
neighborhood.
Okay. Awesome. So two more other business. One is policy related, sort of, I think, and the other one is just a suggestion. So this is a little wonky, so I'm going to summarize it and then I'm going to send it via email to General Counsel, Assistant General Counsel, and Eve and Ben, okay? It's something to think about, and I think it really dives deep into the equity of our district. This was brought to my attention by none other than guidance counselors at Aiken High School, Swoop, and then their college manager. This is an awesome, I don't always feel this way when people send suggestions. I think this is awesome. So you know where I stand. I'm wearing it on my sleeve as opposed to normal. You're always trying to figure out what did Bolton and Morosky think about this.
You never know.
Terrible. So, okay, this is interesting. I'm going to go quick though, okay, because we're already way over time. It's been a great meeting. So we have at CPS 2 pathways, right, to get college credit, AP and College Credit Plus, right? Okay. So in AP, you take it for a year, you score 3 or above, you get college credit. However, usually it's Walnut Hills and Clark. That's the data that says to get 3 and above. Even though we know because of research, if you get a 1 on that test, you're still better prepared for college. So again, and Eve Bolton knows more about AP than me. I never
Number
experienced
one in the world. Yes.
There you go. There it is. Number 1. Yeah. So she knows that this is real. So we want kids to take AP even if they're not getting college credit. But some kids who may only get a 1 on the AP are still able to get college credit because of our sort of progressive, College Credit Plus program. And also we know that it is now a graduation pathway for English and math courses in the ODE 2023 graduation pathway. So I'm just kind of building to what I'm getting really excited about. So the Ode Funding Model, says a K through 12 district pays for the student's tuition. Courses run from $41 to max $166. The district currently pays for this, right, for students who are in CCP. And now here's where we get to the interesting kind of policy implication, and this is why I felt this was appropriate for this committee. According to state law, and I think Dan and Stephanie are going to like this too, because I think it really scratches a couple itches that are interesting. According to state law, students who are not, and this also goes back, Ms. Bolton, to the non-U.S. citizen piece. So it kind of ties in a lot of things, actually. According to state law, students who are not documented and therefore do not have proper residency status are not permitted to participate in the ODE-funded CCP. Now, these are students who are funded in our schools, where we are not permitted to require or request citizenship or residency information. So when it comes to signing them up, however, for the college courses, and I see Dan nodding, he kind of sees where this is going already, residency is required qualification. In fact, several of the schools that we partner with ask this on their application. So, in my opinion, and I assume, these folks at Aiken who brought this to my attention, this seems to go somewhat in conflict with our equity policy, as the opportunity is not afforded to these same students that we have a number of, and it's growing as it is to other students, and it blocks them not only from maybe getting college credit, but also access to a potential graduation pathway as per ODE. So while this is a state thing, So I'll cut to the chase now. I'm going to send all this in the email, but hopefully this has all made sense. The nods tell me it has. This is a state change that would probably have to change so we'd be able to, and so I would like to do two things at the end of this sort of other business update. Thing number one would be bring this to the full board as an opportunity to engage the state government, that we request that they look at this and potentially make a change so that we as CPS can fund, with our allocated dollars from the state, students who are undocumented, particularly if this is going to be opened up as a graduation pathway. That to me is the value proposition we have with the state government. If they're doing that, they should be able to open it up that we can fund them. In the meantime, and this is the part that'll have budget implications, and Eve, I will lift this up perhaps as another one of our potential budget asks, so to speak. And I have real numbers too. This is not theory. In the meantime, we're asking that the district create funds available to support academically qualified students who want to be in CCP who are not documented. So it appears that at least this one school in question, Aiken, has costs covered through a grant that they sort of acquired on their own, which is awesome, to pay for 21-22 school year. The cost would be $11.44 per credit hour at UC, or $337 per credit at Cincinnati State. Right now at this one school at Aiken, there are 15 students who need this support. So we could extrapolate that out and make some assumptions about what it would be district-wide. So again, it's $1,144 per credit at UC, $337 at Cincy State, 15 students at Aiken at one school. And the idea would be potentially put aside some dollars so that undocumented, I keep doing the bunny ears because I just don't like, it just seems like a strange word, but whatever, undocumented students could partake in this program. So that's like my big other business. I will send all this to everybody. I will bring this up in our full board meeting. Any comments or not, obviously entertain them, but I'll send you all this information. Eve?
Lee, I totally agree, and especially Aiken, the student body has so significantly changed, and it's remarkable what's happening 2 blocks away from where I'm sitting right now. I'm very supportive of whatever Dan says we could do legally, and certainly the petitioning of the state to try to get it done. But with this particular state, I can't imagine that they would change anything, because it would probably require state legislative action, and God knows about our legislature. But yeah, the money, what are we allowed to do, Dan?
First time I'm hearing of this issue. But it's right up our alley in terms of looking at and trying to figure out a solution. I have a question that I'm afraid to ask, but is the prohibition on spending dollars for college credit for some of these kids, do they have the ability to enroll in Cincinnati State or UC? So forgetting for a second about our college credit, the plus, when they leave us, I just don't know. Do you know whether again, undocumented, somebody do they have the ability to enroll? Like, of course they have the ability to enroll in CPS, because we're not allowed to ask about immigration status, nor would we. But I'm not sure if that's true at the college level. Do you know?
I don't.
I wonder if that might relate to why there's not funding.
But again, I think the linchpin in this is that it is also a pathway to graduation now. And so,
totally agree with that.
Yeah, so regardless if they can go to, Cincy State or UC, they could get those courses and use it as a way to graduate from us. So if nothing else, I think it's still, because it's a good question, and I wouldn't be surprised if the answer to that question is adamantly no. At the same time, it still seems like it'd be worthwhile. But that's a good question to ask. I don't know.
No, but your point about it being a graduation pathway is a good one as well, because it's sort of like saying to a kid, yeah, you can take these 3 classes, but you can't take those 3 classes. And we wouldn't be able to do that. So I like where this is going.
Cool. Yeah, I did too. I'm happy to. Yeah, I did too. I thought it was an interesting point to create more equity.
If they're willing, I'd love to have the names of those, or for you to provide us with some context so we can dig into their concerns more.
Don't send names though.
What's that?
No, of the kids. Not of the kids. I meant of the teachers and counselors.
Go out to the center of the universe, College Hill, and meet with the wonderful principal and the wonderful head counselor and the lead teacher in this matter.
We'll do it.
Yeah.
That would be great. Now, Mike, I'm so glad you brought this up. I mean, it's this new America that's terrible. Imagine people that not being allowed to pursue this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's sick.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, one last thing, and then see if there's a hearing of the public. My one last thing is, do we meet in person in June? Dan?
That was going to be my other business. You have the ability under the changes to law to meet once more in June, but starting July 1, 2021, you will no longer have a quorum if folks are remote. They can participate remotely, but they would not count for a quorum and they could not vote. So June is you can still meet remotely in June, but not in July.
No, yeah, and I knew that, so I was just trying to kind of like jump the gun, so to speak. And Eve is gone, so I guess this isn't even a meeting anymore. But we'll
let's do August.
You okay? All right. We'll wait till August. We'll do one more virtual. Thanks, Eve. Great. Any hearing of the public?
Yes, we have Ed Paff has asked to speak. Go ahead, Mr. Paff.
Hey there, everyone. I believe I'm visible and my audio should be working. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I was going to say that I was hopeful that we could do this at all the committee meetings, but that may not be applicable much longer if public is allowed into the committee. Or maybe if we're still saying virtual, maybe that's something for the committees to look into, because I always appreciate the opportunity to speak. But I just wanted to chime in with a couple things. We made it. I'm happy to say I'm wrapping up my second year as PTO president over at Hyde Park School. And I'm gladly handing the reins over, though I won't be going anywhere. I was elected to the LSDMC starting next year, so I'll still be around, and I'm happy to report that. The year's kind of been a challenge from the PTO perspective. And I just wanted to encourage the board to find a way to allow parent volunteers back into the building for next school year. Even if it means that require vaccinations. I know there was some talk about that for teachers, and I would be in support of a requirement for vaccinations if we could get back into the buildings. Yeah. Our parents missed so many opportunities to volunteer at the school this year. And I know that many would love to have those opportunities back. In addition, the PTO, at least at Hyde Park School, has a ton of supplies and items stored inside of our building that we have struggled to gain access to throughout the year. And it's become a burden on the staff there to retrieve things for us. And we often can't remember where different items are. So that is another good reason why speaking to hopefully get that changed for next school year. And that's all I really had. Hopefully you all have a wonderful summer and speak to you again soon. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Can you all hear me?
Yes?
Okay, because I'm like frozen on my end, but that's fine. We're right at the end here. Pat, make sure that Ed's suggestion is definitely reflected in the minutes, because I would like to bring that up at the full board. My wife just brought up yesterday, as most of y'all know, I've volunteered at Euler for quite some time and haven't been able to this past year as a mentor. And she asked me, she goes, "Are you going to be able to mentor students next year?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I think that's up to me and my 6 colleagues." So good conversation to have. Thanks, Ed. Thanks for your service, and congrats on the LCMC election, man. Very good. Awesome. Any other final thoughts before we adjourn?
Mike, I would just second the idea of bringing that up. And
Yep.
it is unimaginable to me that we will not be fully open with certain mitigating conditions. I mean,
Same.
we are going to be open,
Yep.
and that's just going to be.
Yep. No, I'm with you too. So Ed, we feel hopeful, man, but we'll have that conversation with everybody else. So thanks again. Great. And without any further business, meeting is adjourned. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, bonds.